Howdy, gang. So in another episode of Ed Does Crazy Stuff, ridiculous stuff so that you don't have to, I've created a wet, dry, wet rig. And why would I do that? Well, a few years ago, I ordered a custom junction from one of those companies. And it was a fine unit. They did a really good job. They knew what they were doing. And I was pretty happy with it. But let me tell you a phrase that I've never heard in a recording session in 22 years of being in Nashville. We need a wet, dry, wet rig on this song. Yeah, that's something you'll never hear. I never even heard we need a stereo rig on this song. So makes you wonder, right? And part of it is because you have to think, and this is a lesson for production, and I've been kind of getting into some of this lately, you have to think about panning before you get to mix. Because if there's two guitar players on the session and I'm in stereo, what are you going to do with the other guy? Often keyboards are in stereo, so we kind of caddy pan those a lot of the times, or sometimes we don't even use it in stereo. But often you'll have two mics on a piano. But if I'm in stereo as a guitar player, where does the other guy or gal go? That's why. You got to think about panning, stereo field, tonalities, where parts fit. So wet, dry, wet, and stereo, not so much, but they are fun. I will admit they're fun as heck to play around with at home. So I'm telling you all this because I did order another junction type device, actually two devices, because I got the bug. And it had been over a month since I ordered it. And I was like, oh yeah, what happened to that? And then I realized, wait a second, not only is it taken over a month, but I'm going to have to pay 25% VAT. So that would put it, in an area where I was uncomfortable. I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. And then I really made the decision to cancel my order because I found this, and I'm going to flip the camera around. So about a year ago, when I was still in Nashville, I bought this micro line mixer. I don't know, it'd probably be better to leave it this way, right? Now, what this micro line mixer does is you have your dry signal go through here. The dry signal comes out and feeds up to 3 different wet signals and blends them in parallel. Because what I had done originally when I was trying to do a poor man's version of this is here's the dry rig, right? So this whole board is the dry rig, and that's going to the Quilter direct amp in mono. But I had my HX Stomp set up, as you can see, for wet. But the problem is it wasn't really wet, dry, wet. What it is dry and stereo, because all of these things were in series into here. So the trick is for real wet, dry, wet, and parallel, because otherwise it's just dry and stereo. And it gets a little muddy. If you run, so here's the modulation. The modulation is the artifact into the radius, into the diffractor soundings chromatic journey. So that was my modulation. But then you were going to run that into the LVX, which was then going to go into the old blood noise stereo delay, stereo reverb, and then into here. That's not wet, dry, wet, really. I mean, it is, because you're going to have full dry and full wet, but it's serial wet instead of parallel, and parallel definitely sounds better. So enter the micro line mixer. So what I've got going is I've got stereo out of the old blood noise, and that goes into here, TRS to TRS, because this takes TRS in or out. So you can put mono in and have mono out, but obviously if you're doing wet, you want stereo out. We'll get to that in a second. Then I've got the same thing. Now these are EBS cables, these cables here. So you've got, it's an ABY cable, tip ring to TRS, right? And so I've got, you're coming into here mono, into here stereo, because these two are stereo. Out of here stereo, into here stereo, and then out of the diffractor soundings into wet in one. So that's your modulation. That's your modulation wet. And then the LVX is got a mono signal. This same thing has a mono signal coming in and a stereo going out to wet 2. And like I said before, the old blood noise here is going out stereo into this. Now, here's another cool thing. When I tell you how much this costs, you're going to die. So you have the stereo out. That's the wet out, right? Wet out. And you can control the wet volume. Now, ideally, you want the wet volume to be full. But you can also blend in some dry. Maybe you want that, but probably you don't if you've got a separate dry signal. But some people might want that. And so you've got the stereo wet. So this is a TRS cable. It's a Roland TRS cable. And that is running to another, it's an ABY cable, another ABY, into the HX Stomp XL. And then out of the HX Stomp XL to the Pinstripe Pedals DISO and taking XLR out. Now, one of the things that the Stomp XL is so good for is you can take stereo out, get rid of all the other effects, and it's fairly clean. So for instance, if I was running, and I've checked, this is the other trick, is phase, right? I had to check the phase. I've even been able to flip it because I'm coming out of the clean, so the end of my dry ends at my spiral effects secret chord, goes into the clean, out of the clean into my volume pedal, out of my volume pedal into the gig rig humdinger. That splits everything out, or at least it splits two of the things out. Whoops, I think we lost the cable here. Hold on. Now, is it worth it? I don't know. I really don't know. But what I am going to do, I'm going to flip this around, is I saw Dan from that pedal show. He has a thing called a wetter box, which is very, very similar to this in execution. And you can do mono parallel, meaning you can have two channels with a wet channel blending in to the output in mono. So you can have, modulation, delay, reverb on one channel, and you can then send the second channel to another reverb, or reverb and a delay, but they will be fully wet. So my recommendation is whatever the second channel is, you need to be able to blend. And if you have more than one effect, they're going to be fully wet, and then they're going to be in series fully wet. So I think the best way to use this in mono to get parallel is have dry, modulation, delay, reverb, and then split it to another reverb and then blend that reverb in. So you're going to have like this crazy, awesome reverb sound, and you only need this box to pull it off. And I think the humdinger, I think Dan used the humdinger because he split it after the dry, sort of like what I'm doing. Not exactly, but sort of. So guess how much this cost? $150. Whereas if I was going to buy a wet, dry, wet rig, it was going to be like $800 or $1,000. It was $1,100 last time I tried it. So again, Ed doing things that you don't have to so you can save money. And this is by music, let's see, RJM Music Technic Micro Line Mixer, $150. Hopefully they still make them. And now I'm going to put the camera down because I'm an idiot stumbling around here, and I'm going to let you hear what this sounds like. And I'm not going to do much mixing to this. I'm just going to check it for phase one more time before you hear it on YouTube. All right? All right, cool.